As members of the legislature meet in Springfield during a special session to pass a state budget, one of the key issues is Governor Rauner's efforts to have property taxes lowered. Next, we talk to State Representative Jeanne Ives about her efforts to fix flaws in the system of assessing property values for taxation. This runs about 15 minutes. Jeanne Ives, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel. And as we are standing here, the leaders of the four caucuses are coming out from having discussions. Senator John Cullerton just said that he was optimistic that they may be close to a budget deal. One of the key components that the governor has asked for has been the property tax, and having everyone knows Illinois' property taxes are so high compared to other states, and the governor wants to put a freeze on those. What's been bandied about is somewhere between 2 to 4 years. It looks like it may be 4. Okay. We wanted to talk to you because you have been talking about an issue that we want to get more details on. This: how are the property values assessed? And I think you think there's some flaws in that system. Can you tell us what is it that you would like to have the state do that we are not currently doing?
Well, so I've been working on this issue in terms of valuation and proper assessments for about 3 years now, and put together a task force, but did not file legislation on a task force to look how we do assessments. Did not file that until this year. I filed the bill in February, and then what did we discover in June? The Chicago Tribune came out with an incredible trilogy of stories about how assessments in Cook County particularly are not done in an equitable way. Now, if you talk to any assessors around the state, they knew that this was happening. They knew that that you had an inordinate number of property tax appeals in Cook County, that they were very far in terms of their coefficients of dispersion, which is how accurate are their assessments. They had really high numbers in that relative to the rest of the state. So we knew that we needed to tackle this idea of how are assessments done. There's no reason to do it anymore with paper and pen, shove it into a drawer where nobody knows what you're doing on it. There's no mystery in it. There's ways to do this with computerized modeling. And so the task force that I put together with Warren Dixon, who is the Naperville Township assessor, is a task force that's good for everybody in the state. And it really gets to the heart or the base of when we are doing property taxes. Since we do have the highest property taxes, or we compete with New Jersey every year who's got the highest property tax, but we have one of the highest. And so since we do have that and we have an over-reliance on funding our schools that way, at least we have to be fair about how we're doing that assessment process. That's what my task force is about. It's now HJR 69, and it's a task force that would be bipartisan. And actually, I have bipartisan sponsors on this task force. It's not really political in nature. It's just getting to the heart and the foundation of valuing property properly. And that's what my task force is about.
Where do we stand in that process in coming out with a report and making this happen?
Well, the initial bill that I filed was HR 139, and it was improperly labeled. It should have been an HJR. So that initial bill was thrown into subcommittee in revenue. And bills thrown into subcommittee are meant to die in subcommittee. They're not meant to move anywhere. So I have talked to the chairperson of Revenue Committee about my new House Joint Resolution 69, and he said that he would honestly try and get it out of Rules Committee and get it through his committee. So we'll see how far I get in that process. I know Senator Connolly has filed a similar bill in the Senate, a Senate Joint Resolution. We think this task force, though, is important for every single property owner in the state, just so that you have assurances that you're not being gamed by a system that is essentially extracting a lot of wealth from you in the form of the highest property taxes in the nation.
Well, and interestingly, if I understand the Tribune article, one of the things that was happening is that they were undervaluing, not overvaluing some of the property, at least in Cook County, if I have that right. And then, so would you be saying that by doing it the way you're talking about, by modernizing this, using more of the computer modeling, as you said, we would be taking the politics out of it and just going with an economic model?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what we're trying to get to the root of. Because if you read the trilogy of articles again, they also specifically talked about how minority communities and the poor community, those who are some of the poorer communities, were really getting hurt with some of the largest assessments in terms of tax rates because they didn't have the wherewithal or the knowledge about how to appeal their property taxes. They just kept paying and paying. And especially on the west side of Chicago, they had definitely examples back there, and really South Suburban Cook. You have property tax rates that are approaching 10%. That's usury. That means that every 10 years you're paying for your property and property taxes. It's outrageous. People can't afford it. You are pushing the poor and minority folks out of home ownership, and so there's a big disparate impact here on minority communities, and we have to address this. They, I think, have cause for a civil rights action, actually, considering how maligned they've been in this system.
Well, we also, as we have property values to where people, or property taxes, I should say, so high,
Yes.
that in many instances the property tax is nearly as much as the mortgage payment, and that has crept up over time. But we're putting younger people at a disadvantage of trying to live in Illinois and buy a home, aren't we? I mean, because we have a system that is over-relying on paying education through local property taxes instead of more of a general tax. Is that fair to say?
Oh, that's more than fair to say. Certainly the state is not picking up its share of responsibility. We're not at 50% of the school funding. In my district, only 9% of the funding for education comes from the state. The rest is picked up mainly by the property tax owners. 73% of my property tax bills goes straight to the schools. So, and actually my school is spending at less than the state average for education, so it's not like they're spending an inordinate amount of money on education. It's just that we don't get hardly anything from the state because the state knows that we've got some property wealth behind our schools, and so they fund us less. So you're extracting wealth from people, and every time you're doing that, you're actually, when they go to sell the price of their property is getting discounted for the property taxes that somebody else would have to pay.
And the other thing I would point out, just to point out the obvious, when you pay a property tax, you're paying that irrespective of your ability to pay. Whereas if we pay an income tax, it's based upon the amount of income that you have. Even with a flat tax, you're paying less if you earn less. Right?
Yes, so those on a fixed income, seniors specifically, have a very difficult time to paying an escalating property tax, no matter what exemption you were to give them. It's really hurting people's ability to do anything else. We have seniors that come to our assessor every day saying, look, I can't afford to stay, I can't afford to leave. What do I do?
Has there been, let's hope that we get a budget here, has there been, to what extent is there a growing awareness and maybe political movement to go back and look at what some other people have suggested, the tax swap, that we can lower property taxes if we fund education more through a general tax, whether it's sales, combination of sales, income, where we would raise income tax but then lower the property taxes, which others have argued would be more fair to some of those communities where it's in agriculture areas with less density of buildings to tax, and poor, as you alluded to, some of the poor neighborhoods around the state where the property values are low.
So that's a big discussion. That, doing a property tax swap with income. I know that's always been discussed before. There's no doubt. Over time, Illinois has to pick up a bigger share of the cost for education, and I agree with that. I don't know that you can easily put into a tax swap a bill. That's not an easy thing to do. The best thing that we could do really is to control costs that drive up the cost of government at the local level. We have got to give these people collective bargaining reform, pension reform, third-party contracting.
School districts.
Yes, school districts, municipalities that are paying pensions, they all need bigger reform. But then after that, the biggest thing we can do is we can grow our commercial and business base. We have got to have these business reforms that Governor Rauner keeps talking about. If you grow your tax base, you'll find that that EAV gets spread, or that levy gets spread across a greater EAV base, and you won't have people getting taxed out of their homes so much. In fact, in 2006, the property tax base for business and commercial was about 40% of the EAV came from business commercial. Now it's 33%. Well, what happens? Those levies never stopped growing. They grew during that time frame, and every time they grew, the amount that government levied against that tax base went to the residential property owner who couldn't afford it. You grow the tax base, and you can start to grow this problem out of existence. Additionally, you grow the tax base and you get those income taxes coming in, you can funnel more money through the education formula to districts and force them to tampen down their levies at the school. So it's the chicken and the egg approach. Which one do you come first? And the best thing that we can do in Illinois, we have to grow our business tax base. Must do that. We can't do anything else, and we must reduce government costs. The cost of doing government is inordinately high. Those two things have to happen before we discuss anything else.
And the one thing I would say, and I know you got to go in it, but we talked about the 4-year tax cap. If we cap increases in property taxes for 4 years, people would have said that's going to hurt municipal government because their pension payments are going up, and that means we're going to be freezing their revenue stream while their costs go up. Same thing with schools. It's going to hurt schools and local government. So to that end, and I guess to go back to an earlier question, should we be taking, and is the legislature maybe after this long, prolonged budget battle saying, it's not enough just to cap something. We need to really rewrite this tax code and to look at that. Let's get this budget, but then let's look at rewriting this tax code so that we can straighten the ship and figure out what we're actually doing to bring both equity as well as fiscal stability.
Sure. So, I wouldn't call myself an ideologue. I'll move on policy where it makes sense to move on policy. I have a hard time voting for policy that makes things worse or doesn't solve the problem. And I'll tell you what, the idea of talking about a property tax freeze was always the wrong moniker. They really needed to talk in terms of property tax relief, and quite frankly, that's why in the last couple days you see some of the leaders talking more and using the word relief instead of a freeze. Here's why. Because you can't, right now, the way that the legislation is written, all you're doing is freezing the government's levies. You're not freezing anybody's individual taxes. In fact, in the pension bills that are being proposed right now, pension is outside of the levy, debt is outside the levy. Additionally, if they've got all these exemptions put in there for now people on SSI, veterans, seniors. None of them means tested. SSI is obviously because by its nature it is. The other ones, none of them means tested. Anytime you add to the exemptions amount, the people who aren't getting those exemptions are going to have more of that levy spread to their value of the homes. I know I'm talking a lot. This gets very difficult, but it's really important for people to understand.
You're basically saying you're taking
freeze isn't a freeze, and they're getting
that kind of a freeze with Swiss cheese freeze. It means you're going to have fewer people to tax. You're going to have to tax them more have the same revenue.
That's right. In my district, when the Michelle Mussman bill passed, HB 156, I was the only no on it. She added in a bunch of exemptions to people, and I knew it was a bad deal. Sure enough, I was vindicated by the Daily Herald in their seminal article, front page headline article about how that deal did nothing for the people in my district. In fact, that deal would have raised the property taxes on the average homeowner in my district, because when you carve out all these exemptions for folks, everybody else who actually doesn't get one of them is going to pay more and more and more. And a freeze isn't a freeze again, so people need to get that out of their head right now. And I hope everybody hears this interview now, because a freeze is not a freeze. The only thing that we can do to really hold down costs, if we wanted to, is be a flat-out cap against your value. And unless you have a taxable event, it doesn't ever increase. That's what they've done in other states. Can Illinois get there right now? Not right now. Over time, maybe.
Jeanne Ives, we touched on some issues. It does get to be somewhat complex, but you did a pretty good job of explaining it to us, and we appreciate it.
Thank you so much. All right.